Little Johnny asks his grandma how old she was. Grandma answered, 49 and holding. Johnny thought for a moment, stared at Grandma, and then said, Grandma, how old would you be if you let go? Takes me into the conversation I want to have. Short and sweet segue, because I don't have a lot of time and I have a lot to say about truth, speaking truth, truth tellers, and how they need to be revered, because we don't live always in a world of truth. I've been obsessed with truth for a long, long time. I don't mean the trivial day-to-day truths. They're important, but that's not the truth I'm talking about. Honey, do you like my organic, sugar-free, gluten-free quinoa cookies? Of course I do, dear. I love them. That's just theoretical, I assure you. Sweetheart, is my hairline receding? Of course it's not, darling. It's like 1987 up there all year long. Right? We have to say these things to our spouses to keep the peace. Shalom bait. They all have their place in creating relationship. But I'm interested in the bigger truths, ultimate truths, right? These massive truths, integrity crossroad moments, soul-defining situations, moral mountains. Because I guess I come from a home that didn't always tell the truth. A loving home growing up, but grappling with depression in a family with depression, and we weren't allowed to talk about it, and other significant moments, as you know, in my family's life, it were off limits. Divorces, I think every aunt and uncle I had was divorced, my parents divorced, my grandparents divorced, Ariella's family divorced. We didn't talk about any of the Ds, depression, divorce, death. They were off limits, and I became obsessed at 16 years old, with seeking out and speaking about, more importantly, truth and celebrating truth whenever, wherever, whomever speaks truth. Like them or not, agree or not, you have to respect truth tellers. And that brings us to this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is all about truth-telling, or frankly, a failure to tell the truth. We read about in Parshat Kitisa this famous example of what happens when you don't speak truth. Because what happened? Moses is up on the mountain. He's up getting the 10 commandments. Remember that moment? He's coming down the mountain. He has 15 commandments. He drops one, 10 commandments. Sorry, that was the movie. The book, he comes down with 10 commandments. And before he gets back to the camp, what happened down at base camp? It ran amok. It was pandemonium. It was a belagan, as we say in Hebrew. Why? Because the Israelites were freaking out that Moses was delayed coming down the mountain. And so what did they do? The children of Israel, as children always do, they wreak havoc if left unattended, unsupervised, without Annabelle there. It just ran amok. If only Annabelle was there. Unfortunately, they had Aaron. Who was Aaron? Aaron was Moses' brother. Aaron was a good guy. He was a spokesman. He knew how to speak. Moses had a tougher time speaking. He was a peace seeker. The rabbis call Aaron Rodef Shalom, the peacekeeper in the house. He didn't like to rock the boat, make waves, probably a lot of little lies, keeping the shalom bait, the peace in the house. And that's fine under certain circumstances, but that's not what they needed then and there. What did they need? They didn't need a politician to smooth things over. They didn't need to form a UN Security Council to make sure they're okay. They needed an effective form of leadership. They needed a rabbi, a teacher, a leader, a man to stand up and set the record straight. This is not okay. What you're doing is unacceptable, and it's going to have consequences. But he wasn't that man. Moses comes down the mountain and sees his brother and says something deeply profound. Ma asa lecha ha'am hazeh. What has this people done to you? It's a strange, actually, flip. I would have thought it would have said, what did you do to this people? But Moses is saying, brother, what in the heck happened to you? What happened to that leader I left behind? What happened to that man that I knew you could become? You weren't there. You weren't that rabbi. You weren't that teacher. You weren't that leader when they needed you most. Ki heveta alav chata gedolah. And you, because of your dereliction of duty, have brought upon them a great and grave sin. Your failure to speak up, to speak truth, in the end, has consequences upon these people. One of my favorite teachings, and something that's been driving me for 15 years, is Rabbi Israel Salanter, who said, a rabbi whose community does not disagree with him isn't really a rabbi. But a rabbi who fears his community is not really a man. Aaron, the rabbi, the teacher, feared disagreement. He was no rabbi. And Aaron, the leader, was afraid to speak his truth. In the end, he was no leader and he was no man. And that brings us to another story that just echoes this. Thousands of years prior to today, about 2,000 plus years ago, the story of Purim. The story of Purim took place in Persia, what we would call modern-day Iran. The story of Purim is about a madman. I know it's hard to believe, a madman at the helm in Iran who wanted to annihilate the Jews. His name was Haman. Its story hasn't changed. Haman had one purpose, as all totalitarian dictators do. They want to always eradicate the Jews. So Haman set out on his masterful plan. There was only one person standing in between him and his plan, and his name was King Ahasuerus. King Ahasuerus wasn't a bad man. He was naive. He thought Haman would change. He thought Haman didn't mean it's just rhetoric. He's not going to follow through and annihilate the Jews. He believed that somehow Haman would come around, listen to reason, and soften his heart. Everybody around Haman bows down, acquiesces, or is complicit by simply remaining silent. Everyone except Mordecai. Mordecai Yehudi. Mordecai, the authentic, true Jew. We read, Vayar Haman kiyena Mordecai korea, umishtachaveh lo vayimale Haman chema. And when Haman saw that Mordecai, the Jew, would not bow down, would not keep quiet, would not shut up and sit on the sidelines, Haman became furious. Mordecai, the man, will not sit on the sidelines. Mordecai, the leader, cannot keep quiet. And Mordecai, the rabbi, teaches Esther, his niece, what it means to be a Jew. Remember, Esther is no queen at the beginning. Technically, she is, but ultimately, she isn't a matriarch teaching lessons in her own right. She's waffling because Esther in Hebrew means hidden. She is hiding her Jewish identity. She is hiding her voice. She is hiding the truth. And in a moment, Mordecai steps up and teaches her and says to her, you cannot hide for long. And if not you, then somebody else will step up and speak the truth and save the day. Mordecai inspired his niece, making him a rabbi and turning her into a true Yehudi, Yehudiah, which means Jew, which comes from the word to recognize the truth. She speaks out, and Haman's plot is foiled, and evil is overcome, and the Jewish people are saved single-handedly because this man, Mordecai, had the audacity to stand in front of leaders and the world and declare, this is the truth. This past week, I was in Washington, D.C. with some of you and 17,000 other Zionists, not Jews, some Jews, but Christians, Jews, atheists, Republicans, Democrats. It's truly the only bipartisan pro-Israel organization that I know of that caliber. J Street is partisan, and so is ZOA on both opposite ends of the spectrum. But if you go to an AIPAC event, it's Democrat, it's Republican, conservative, liberal, and they all have one thing in common. They are all Zionists. 17,000 Zionists under one roof. It's unbelievable. It is inspirational. You must go. I have gone every year almost for 10 years. This year was a little different. This year was a lot harder. Maybe it's because it was personal for me. A little anxious, going to a class on Hezbollah, listening to Hezbollah mounting in Syria as Ariella, myself, and the family are moving there in 4 months, not to Syria, but to the other side of the border in the Galilee up near Syria. So I was a little distracted. I had some anxiety, but I wasn't the only one. Because this was a year of unprecedented anti-Semitism, as you know, all throughout Europe. This was a year where we saw rising anti-Zionism in this country on college campuses where our Jewish children are not safe if they speak about Israel in a pro-Zionist way. Boycott, divestment, sanction, BDS movement is spreading throughout the world. We're preoccupied. We're preoccupied, of course, with Iran. This was the focus, the topic everybody was talking about. In every class I went to, in every part of the hall that I experienced while walking through the halls there, everybody was debating what happens if Iran gets nuclear weapons, how long, what's going to be. And of course, the big issue, the topic of all topics, was this past Tuesday. The Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and at that time, his forthcoming speech. Was this a Republican stunt? Was this an Israeli election stunt? Because in 2-3 weeks, he's going to be up for re-election in Israel. Should he have been there? Shouldn't he have been there? Because remember, as you all know, Representative John Boehner invited him and didn't have the blessing of the president. The doubts, the debates, the energy was just sucked out of the room over this issue. Everybody, not only there, but around the world was talking about this. Perhaps the most contentious speech ever not given. Not a word was spoken, and the entire world had an opinion about this debate. And there was confusion, and there was anxiety, and there was uncertainty until 11 a.m. last Tuesday morning, at least at AIPAC. All of the confusion and anxiety and doubt and uncertainty left that space. And it left that space in I imagine a lot more venues around the country. It certainly left the space of my heart. In that moment, I saw a man who got up, like him or not, like how it came to be or not, like what he said or not, he did his job as the elected official prime minister of the state of Israel. He stood in front of the world. He stood in front of naysayers. He stood in front of all of us, and he spoke his truth. You don't have to like him. You don't have to like the message, but you damn well better respect somebody who can stand in front of the world and speak their truth. Because leaders lead and teachers teach, and real men and women, regardless of popularity, regardless of what others think, regardless of what you or I agree with or disagree with, stand up, and when that time is there and the time is now, you don't act like Aaron, you act like Moses, you act like Bibi Netanyahu, and you speak your truth. My friends, put politics aside on this one. Forget about whether or not he should have. He did. That ship sailed. So the question is, did he do it effectively? Did he do it well? Did he make his case? Unequivocally, the man made his case. Again, don't have to agree, but you do have to give him that, because all year long, his entire prime ministership, for the past decade, he's been saying, Iran, 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 and he said it again. We cannot let these modern-day Hamans get their hands on nuclear weapons, because they want one thing. They don't want to negotiate with us. They don't want to reason with us. They want Israel wiped off the map, and they want Jews dead. This regime can't be trusted. No deal, he said unequivocally, is better than a bad deal. And my friends, what we are about to sign is a bad deal. Iranian nuclear program must be shut down and stopped at all costs. Period. That was his truth, and that is the truth, and that should be our truth. This is not a Republican versus Democrat truth. This is not a Likud versus Labor truth. This is not an Arab versus Western truth, or a Jewish versus Muslim truth. Not a President Obama versus a Prime Minister Netanyahu truth. This is simply the emes, as we say in Judaism. This is the simple, unequivocal, straightforward, and yes, painful truth. A painful truth that should bring tears to our eyes, not Nancy Pelosi tears, tears of dismay and disappointment and devastation over the fact that the Prime Minister of Israel is speaking in front of the Congress. There should be tears that 60 of her colleagues, Democrats, boycotted the Prime Minister, that the Black Caucus walked out or wouldn't show up for this speech. We should have tears if we voted for Elizabeth Warren or Jim McGovern or Kathleen Clark, representatives in this state, because they boycotted the Prime Minister. 6 Jewish representatives, Democrats, wouldn't show up and listen to this speech. The Vice President and the President couldn't even watch it on TV. Boycotting Israel. That gives me tears. Tears because Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Tears because this is the elected Prime Minister, the head of that democracy. our greatest ally in the world, who fights Islamic terror every single day of their existence, and we can't show up and we can't support them, and so we boycott them, that gives me tears, because in the end, this was no political stunt. Bibi Netanyahu has been saying it over and over, and in 2 weeks' time, he may not be the prime minister. And he doesn't want to look back on history and say, I should have given that speech, but I didn't want to be perceived as a political stunt. He said what he had to say. He got up and said it with all his might, and that's what men and women and leaders and teachers do. It gave me tears of nachas, tears of joy, the kind of which I imagine some of you felt after the 6-day war. The kind that I remember feeling after the raid on Entebbe, the kind of tears that I don't want to have, but we need to have, like after Israel bombed the Osirak Iraqi nuclear reactor. These are moments as a Jew where I am proud that this man and the Jewish people don't cower like the Aarons in history and don't waffle like so many Esthers continue to do today. I had pride that this Jew, this man, looked Elie Wiesel in the eye. Elie Wiesel, a bipartisan Zionist, survivor of the Holocaust, took an ad out in the New York Times supporting this speech, was there. And Bibi Netanyahu looked at Elie Wiesel and said the following: Elie, your life and your work inspires to give meaning to the words never again. And I wish I could promise you, Elie, that the lessons of history have been learned. I can only urge the leaders of the world not to repeat the mistakes of the past, not to sacrifice the future for the present, not to ignore aggression in the hopes of gaining an illusory peace. But I can guarantee you this: the days when the Jewish people remain passive in the face of genocidal enemies are over. We are no longer scattered among the nations, powerless to defend ourselves. We restored our sovereignty in our ancient homeland, and the soldiers who defend our home have boundless courage. For the first time in 100 generations, we, the Jewish people, can and will defend ourselves. This is why, as Prime Minister of Israel, I can promise you one more thing: even if Israel has to stand alone, Israel will stand. Tell me I am not alone on this. I beg you, I pray that you are with me on this, that you felt some tears of nachas, of pride in this moment. Did any of you feel that? Can I get an amen? Can I get an amen? Did you feel proud to be a Jew in that moment? Agree or disagree that we no longer cower in the shadows, that we're no longer dependent upon people outside of us to give us our independence, our freedom, and our Jewish homeland? Can I get an amen? They do way better at AIPAC. Can I get an amen? Amen. My friends, it says in the Psalms, Lo hametim tahalel Yah velo kol yordei duma. The dead cannot praise you, and neither can dead Jews wiped out by a nuclear holocaust. We cannot praise you for boycotting speeches by the Prime Minister. We cannot praise you if we are making bad deals with Iran. We cannot praise you if we turn our backs on Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, during their hour of need. We cannot praise you if we go down in silence, and we will not go down in silence. For the first time in 100 generations, the Jewish people can defend themselves through a strong AIPAC presence and lobby in this country, through a powerful IDF, Israel Defense Forces, and through men and women of courage, modern-day Mordecais like Bibi Netanyahu, who stand up, who speak out, and who speak the truth. So get involved with AIPAC and demand that we stop this bad deal from happening, and that we never allow Iran to procure nuclear weapons. And wherever you go and whatever you do, follow the great Jewish leaders like Moses and like Mordecai and like Bibi Netanyahu too. Be godlike and own your power and find your voice and speak truth, because that's what it means to be an authentic Jew. God bless Eretz Yisrael. Am Yisrael Chai. Keep on speaking the truth, because that's what we Jews do. And with that, we rise, we face the Israeli flag and the Jewish homeland, Eretz Yisrael.